Yeah, so my first article comes from The Guardian, and it's actually a little bit older. And I was joking with David earlier. I said you could tell it's earlier because it refers to Twitter instead of the company formerly known as Twitter, which is now X. I don't know if that really is a company name that's sticking or not.
Good old Elon and his fantastic branding moves, I tell you.
It's kind of a little bit interesting. So anyhow, the EU announced that I think that the headline here says Google and Facebook urged by EU to label AI generated content. And when I read this article, my overall impression was this is the beginning of the game. And what I mean by that is that you have the EU tends to be a little more restrictive on privacy matters than other government entities. And so they've had some major tussles with the big companies, including Microsoft and Google. And so I think this is them trying to get out ahead. They also have a real problem with Russian disinformation right now for reasons that probably makes a little bit of sense geopolitically. And so they're basically saying we're going to demand that you guys find ways to label content that's AI generated. And I think I don't know if this is the right way to do it. If this is going to work, and there's a whole bunch of different ways to argue there. But I do think that this is kind of the beginning of what we're going to see, which is there's a technological spin up here where there's going to be a lot of fake AI content that nobody knows what it is, and it causes some disruption, some problems. Then there's going to be a snapback, regulatory, maybe consumer driven, where technology is going to catch up and label stuff as AI generated content. Then it's going to shift again, and AI is going to get better and beat the labeling. And then I suspect it's going to be kind of an ongoing arms race, kind of like you had with the internet and computer hacking, right? So everybody puts the internet out, and then all of a sudden hackers are a thing, and then there's security. And I was thinking, David, in sort of a parallel, when I first started working and email was a thing, at first it was just email. And then like a year later, 70, maybe 80% of my inbox would be spam. And my receptionists and my secretaries at the college where I was working were basically traumatized by the amount of really graphic sexual content that was coming over. And not that everybody else wasn't either, but these particular older ladies who had never even considered some of this stuff were basically just getting hammered by the most obscene headlines you'd ever seen. And were like, I'm scared to even open my inbox anymore. And then a little bit later, spam's really not a thing. I mean, I get some unsolicited email, but I don't get any X-rated unsolicited email, or at least if it does, it's in my spam folder. And there's a technological kind of curve that's caught up where for most of us, email is, you get some unsolicited marketing messages in there, nothing that's generally obscene, and actually fewer of those than you would think. So anyhow, I just think that this is kind of the beginning of that arms race. So
yeah, that's a really interesting parallel with email, and when you think about that, of just the comparisons of how prevalent it was then, and to an extent, it is still somewhat prevalent now. And I think what's interesting about it is that you have the technological aspect of it, where technology has advanced so much that now, filter email services like Google are able to be really, really good at filtering out spam, or if it's in doubt, is able to send you something and be like, hey, we're not sure about this one, be careful, and include like a gigantic yellow warning label at the top of it, which I think is really, really helpful. But still, to this day, I have some friends who work in cybersecurity and do ethical hacking for companies. And basically they say that 99% of the time they don't, the most effective way to get any sort of hack or to get into any sort of company is not by some really small technical exploit in some sort of system. It's by fooling a human into thinking that an email or some sort of message is real and getting them to basically give up information, however obvious or less obvious that is, or basically social engineering. And so I think that has a really interesting parallel to what we're going to be looking at with artificial intelligence, and how that works with content. Is that, we're going to have just such a flood of content that people are just not going to know what to do with it. But at least at the moment, it seems relatively obvious, like what is and isn't there to some extent. But I think that the technology for detecting AI and the technology for creating AI generated artwork and content is just going to keep advancing. And so I think that, as you put it, this game is going to be one that is ongoing for quite some time, and I think is going to have some really interesting technological implications as far as not only what is developed for artificial intelligence, but also what's just developed for other applications out of this need. Because I think when email filtering became such a big issue, there was a lot of technology and a lot of developments and advancements in how we think about the way we use computers that were driven forward out of that. And so I think this has potential to have impact beyond just artificial intelligence and can potentially lead to some interesting innovations beyond that.
Yeah, those interesting innovations, David, as you were saying that, I was trying to think I guess thinking back to early days of email set me back to early days of other things. And this is where listeners, there's going to be an interesting sort of generational gap. But I was thinking to Napster, David, which you probably know more as an historical anomaly than an actual thing. But I remember when it was just like a huge deal that music companies were like, there's never going to be artists again. There's never going to be able to be anybody producing music again because it became so easy to digitally share music, right? And then the technology caught up so that it actually became quite untenable to digitally share music. And then the laws caught up. And so when those two things sort of caught up together, all of a sudden, you're probably going to get caught, and you actually were going to get fined if you were pirating songs. And then you had Apple come along and find a whole new way to monetize this. Now, if you're an artist, you're saying, well, yeah, that wasn't a good deal for me. And that's true. I mean, like now the whole music industry has shifted and changed in terms of how you make money. But on the other hand, it's opened up opportunities for independent artists in a way that they never had before. And it's not like there's no artists making money. I mean, there's still ways to make money, and they're doing it in a whole different way. And so that's kind of an interesting example where a technology looked like it completely obliterated an industry. And it did to some extent, but it basically reorganized the industry. It didn't obliterate the human creativity behind it. And, you still have artists, human artists creating music that's desirable, and that's still a multi-billion-dollar industry. There's some winners and losers in that. And so in some ways, it's much harder to make money as an artist than it did before. In other ways, you have a bit of a freedom from some of the big record labels that wasn't possible prior to the digital revolution. So anyhow, there's an interesting parallel there that I hadn't thought about before. I don't know what it was that you said about email that kind of triggered that thought. So.
Hey, thank you so much for listening into this clip of the Alternative Ideas podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to see more of them just like it, you can view some other clips like this one and the full episodes right here on the Alternative Ideas YouTube channel.